especially if you're here for the first time. We want to welcome our friends join us online. How many love spring? I love spring, and I grew up in Illinois and spent most of my life there, went away to college, then went back into business, and then we moved here about 13 years ago, and over the years here in Colorado, I've discovered that people get so tired of the snow that they just want summer, and they sort of leapfrog over spring, and I'm saying, you're missing out on one of the best seasons of the year, right? I mean, what is it about spring that we all love? It's the fact that things that maybe went dormant come back to life, and really that is the message of spring, is it something that has died or went dormant can be brought back to life. More than the message of spring, how many of you know that is the message of Easter? That really is what Easter's all about, and that's what we celebrate. And I just want to say that in the last week, 7-8 days here, we have seen a couple of very iconic pictures of this whole idea that something that was lost was brought back, something that went dormant or died was brought back to life. And maybe that's where you find yourself this Easter. Maybe that's where you find yourself today. Maybe there's something in your life that has died in your mind, or it's certainly gone dormant. It could be a relationship, it could be a career, it could be a dream, it could be something else. And yet, I believe why Easter and spring together give us such a sense of hope and anticipation is because we see those images and we're thinking, man, maybe that can happen in my life. And one of these images that we saw in the last week was the Notre Dame Cathedral. How many of you remember that whole scene just a few days ago? And then the one picture that just captured my attention, and I went ahead and put it on social media, is this one here. And you're saying, well, why that one in particular? What I love about that is in the midst of the ruins, how many know the cross still stands? My point is, it doesn't matter what kind of devastation you face, there's still this message of hope in the midst of the ruins. And by the way, can I also acknowledge that not just is the cross stained, but how many know the cross is empty, friends, and so is the tomb. Can we put our hands together and say, thank God the tomb is empty? Because if it wasn't, the cross would be impotent. It wouldn't have power without the resurrection. And so whatever loss or devastation you've experienced and faced, the cross and the resurrection of Jesus is our focus and point of victory, and Sunday is here. Now, the question I would ask at this point is this. Speaking of the resurrection and the first Easter Sunday, first resurrection Sunday, where do you think you would find Jesus? How many think he's just probably off somewhere just having a great time celebrating? Maybe he's not even on this planet anymore. And yet, how many of you would be surprised to know that he just actually went traveling and went for a walk? True story. He actually, first resurrection, it's like he wakes up that morning and he does a little exercise routine, because I'm sure that Jesus was really fit, because it says the stone had been rolled away. How many of you think Jesus probably rolled that rock right out of the way? And before that, he got engaged in a little bit of CrossFit. Some of y'all need some help with humor. Jesus got up from the grave and was brought back to life, and then he's out on the road, he's traveling, and we're going to come back to that, but it's interesting. You would think maybe there was a better way to go. I mean, he's like in his resurrected body, he could be in a chariot. I mean, something better than Uber or Lyft, right? And speaking of that, how many of you have ever been out on the road and then you find yourself driving past a church and then there's signs out front? How many of you have ever seen some of those church signs and thought, why do they put that on there? I came across, somebody actually sent me one. It's what reminded me, so I did a little research this week with our team and found a few that you might find interesting as well. Let's look at the first one here. Honk if you love Jesus. Text while you're driving if you want to meet him. Not a bad idea. Let's look at the next one. Oh, this is the one somebody sent me. Adultery is a sin. You can't have your cake and Edith too. How many you would say that sign just reinforces why you don't go to church? My hand is up. How about the next one? Best sausage supper in St. Louis. Come and eat, Pastor Thomas. Maybe you can't see that. Poor Pastor Thomas, huh? I don't know about that for breakfast. I think we ought to look at another one before we wrap this up. But whoever stole our AC units, keep on. It's hot where you're going. Turn or burn, baby. There you go. All right, maybe we ought to end it on a better note. Let's look at one more. One cross plus 3 nails plus 1 resurrection equals, how many of you know some Christians can't add? Think. I really don't think I want to end it on that, so I got one more for you. You tell me what you think. It's all about worship, teaching, and friends, right? WTF, did you get that on social media this week? Next time you see it, it's like, oh yeah, worship, teaching. Christians are just so, well, religious people can be lame sometimes. Can we say that? Maybe I should go back to my notes. Here's what I want to say, and I mean this. Easter changes the forecast. Easter changes the forecast. What was doesn't have to be. What has been doesn't have to stay that way. It can be different as I look into the future. And whatever it is, let me say it again, that seemed lost, dead, or dormant in your life, Jesus can bring back to life, because the Bible says that the same power and source of life that brought Jesus back from the dead can live inside of you once you surrender your life to Him. I think about it. I mean, I just believe somebody's going to get set free in this room today. Romans 8:11, the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. And just as God raised Jesus Christ from the dead, He will give life to your mortal bodies by this same Spirit, what? Living within you. Can I just give you the big idea today? Because Jesus was brought back to life, our dead or dormant dreams, careers, marriages, and relationships can be brought back to life. That's the message of Easter. So Easter, can I use this language, is the key that unlocks the door to everything we need, everything that our soul cries out for. How many know there's something in the human psyche and soul that cries out for a better tomorrow, that cries out for a second chance, that cries out for that dream, that relationship, that career to be brought back to life? There's something in us that cries out for that. And I think that's why, let's roll the tape back exactly a week ago, so many people responded favorably to an event that happened in the sports world with our friend Tiger Woods. I don't know how that affected you, but can I talk about it for a minute? He hadn't won a major in 11 years, friends. The last time he won a major was with some of you were boys sitting with your dad watching that star that gave people incentive to get into the game of golf and put it on the register as really a sport that's worth pursuing. And then we all know about things falling apart and unraveling for him. But maybe you, that when you sat and watched that as a younger guy, sat and watched that with your little kids, and all of a sudden it was a different commentary and you had tears rolling down your cheeks. I mean, grown men were in tears last Sunday. Why? Well, I think it's a powerful story, but the story isn't perfect. They never are, because we never are. We're not perfect. But it's a heck of a good one, wouldn't you agree? I mean, being great is one thing. Think about it. Being great is one thing. Being great after falling out of grace takes twice as much work, and I would submit twice as much courage to come back after you've fallen out. That's why a bunch of old dudes got tears in their eyes when he won the Masters last week. And if we pause long enough, we can all find ourselves in Tiger's story. If you think about it with me, that's why we find so many people celebrating. Not so much just because of the man or the event or the moment, but more importantly, it's a celebration of grace, forgiveness, redemption, and a second chance. And why we celebrate is because there's something inside of every one of us that resonates with that, because Tiger's story is my story. Tiger's story is your story. There's something inside of you that wants to come back again after you've had a setback. And you know, the greatest comeback in the history of the world was when Jesus conquered death, hell, and the grave and came back not just from a defeat, but from death itself. Come on, somebody. That is what we celebrate, and that's what He offers us on Easter and every day. So now back to Jesus out for a walk. He comes up behind a couple of fellow travelers, and he engages them in conversation. He finds out very quickly they're disappointed, they're discouraged, they're disillusioned, they're down. Why? Because they had heard about this Messiah, but they also knew that He wasn't there anymore. And so they're discouraged. Let me just insert into the story here. The good news is, how many of you know that Jesus didn't back away from them or push them away? He actually moved toward them. The message in that is, Jesus doesn't back away when our life is falling apart, when things unravel, when things go sideways. He actually moves toward us. And here's the cool thing. He meets us right where we are, but he doesn't let us stay where we are. He meets us, but then he takes us somewhere. And so we pick it up in Luke chapter 24. We're also going to look at just a quick few verses of the same account in John. But it says, as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further. How many of you know that Jesus acted too? I just saw that this week. I've read this so many times. I thought, Jesus was sort of messing with them. How many of you know he'll mess with you sometimes? He will. Don't be disappointed. Be encouraged. He's pretty normal. But they urged him strongly, the text says, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and began to give it to them. It says, then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. I mean, this is funny. Jesus is there. He's walking with them in the road. He's acting like he's going to go on. So they beg him to stay. They walk in. They're sitting down. They're going to have a meal. And at this point, they didn't know it was Jesus. They didn't recognize him. And then it says, when he took the bread and broke it and gave it to them, then they recognized him. And then he poof, he left. I mean, let's just sort of mess with people's minds a little bit. And then this last verse, I got to read it, and we'll come back to it. He says, they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? So it wasn't until they sat down at the table that they recognized him. Why? Notice, can I just say it this way? Some things can't be explained, they can only be experienced. Some of you have heard the Easter story so many times ad nauseum, and yet you've never experienced it, but you're still trying to understand somebody's explanation. And Jesus proves to us that there are certain things in life that can't be explained, but they can be experienced. And he and his power is one of them. So it says it wasn't until he took the bread, broke it, and gave it to them. What happened at that point? Now, my jacket won't allow it, but I believe the robe that Jesus was wearing, the attire he was in, when he took and he handed them the bread, they saw where the nails were. They saw the scars. And all of a sudden, then their eyes were open. It says at that point, they recognized him. They didn't recognize him in his voice. They recognized him in his scars. And there's a whole lot more to it, but the whole point is, now if we keep going with the story, they got really excited because it says in verse 33, they got up and returned to Jerusalem at once. In other words, they were so excited, said, actually, we were told this would happen. Now he's here, he's alive. They got up at once and went back to Jerusalem. How many of you know the fact that Jesus got up so that you and I can get up? The same power that raised Jesus from dead lives in us and can bring back life in our situation. And so now, let's go on. John tells us something here that Luke doesn't. Because you would think, if Jesus is in his resurrected body, how many of you would think they would have included a little cosmetic surgery? Why leave the scars? I mean, really. Why leave scars? Why not just clean the whole mess up? Let's just push it aside and act like it's not even a part of the narrative, and yet it is, and so there's a reason for that, and we might not really understand why, but we'll find out from John why. Verse 19, that Sunday evening the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Can we push the pause button on here? Notice they were meeting behind locked doors. And can I say the doors were locked from the inside, not the outside? How many know that's what fear does? It locks us in, and it keeps us from reaching our full potential. Fear does that to us. And so they were hiding behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them. How many know this dude just sort of went wherever he wanted to? He's with them, poof, he's gone, and then all of a sudden he shows up and he's there with them. And he says, suddenly Jesus was standing among them. Peace be with you, he said. As he spoke, what? He showed them the wounds in his hands. Now let me bring you a little historical and biblical accuracy. when we hear the story of Jesus being nailed to the cross and we think they put the nails through his hands, they didn't put him through the palm of his hand, as we understand, because number one, how many know they would rip right through all of the muscle and sinew there, that it would pull right through. It wouldn't be able to sustain the weight of his body on the cross. And the other thing we need to understand, they considered the hand everything from the end of the finger to the elbow. That was considered the hand. So the nails that went through Jesus' hands, it's not like it's somehow not communicating accurately. It was right behind the wrist, so that would withhold the weight of his body on the cross. And then when he went and he said it showed them what? The wounds in his hands and his side. And it says, then they were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. Why were they filled with joy? Because he promised he would come back to life, but they didn't think he was. And now all of a sudden, he shows up, and they're hiding behind locked doors. There's so many layers to this story that we've got to unpack. But can I just go on record as saying today, Easter is the key to freedom. We've had a focus here at 3D for this entire year, 2019, on freedom, and we just finished a study through one of the letters that Paul wrote to one of the churches. But the whole point is Easter is the key to freedom. Why would I say that? Jesus said, see my hands, see my feet, see my side. By the way, how many of you know that 5 is the number for grace in numerology? And there were 5 wounds, scars, one on this wrist, one on that wrist, one on the left, one on the right foot, and one in his side. That's relevant. I'm going to come back to it. But he said to him, you know what? He said, I was killed, but I didn't stay dead. My scars tell the story. I mean, God didn't want to sanitize this thing. He wanted to keep it real. And all of a sudden, we recognized they were locked in because of fear. But Jesus, how many of you know, kicked the door down, but he actually didn't have to kick the door down. He just picked the lock. How many of you know that's what grace does? Grace finds us when we're locked in our fear, we're locked in our defeat, we're locked in our dormancy, and grace breaks in, even sometimes uninvited and unexpected, but all of a sudden the doors are open and the fear is gone and the power comes. And that's what grace does. Grace breaks in to set us free. So I want to say this, that Easter is the key to freedom. And beyond that, Jesus didn't come, can I just say this, to conceal his pain. He didn't come to gloss it over, to get some cosmetic surgery, and so there's no scars, and the time he shows up, it's just like perfect Jesus now. How many of you know that you can have scars without being devastated? Scars are evidence that there were nails. There were wounds. And so we understand then that he didn't come to conceal his pain. He came to reveal his glory. And if Jesus hadn't been nailed to the cross, can I just tell you, his power never would have been released. So what we're really communicating here is the message that we've all been wounded. How many of you have been wounded at some point in your journey? If you see somebody close by that doesn't have their hand up, elbow them really good. They'll get a wound, and then they'll be able to raise their hand, because at some point you've lived long enough, you get a wound. But can I also acknowledge that's a two-sided coin? We've also wounded others. We all have. Sometimes unknowingly, inadvertently. We have wounded others. And so here's the message of Easter. Here's the message of Christianity. Here's the message of the cross. That Easter is the key to freedom, but the key to freedom is forgiveness. The key to freedom is forgiveness. If you're really going to live free, you're going to have to receive and live a life of forgiveness. Now, right away, I know that some of you are about to push back and you're about to shut down emotionally, and you're going to say, Keith, you have no idea what I've been through, and now you're going to challenge me on Easter, a day of celebration, to forgive somebody. And my answer is yes, but let me qualify the yes with the fact that forgiveness isn't a couple of things that we think it is. Forgiveness, before you push back too far, can I just lean in a little bit and help bring some context for forgiveness? Because forgiveness doesn't mean it didn't happen. Forgiveness doesn't mean that what wounded you never happened to you. Jesus said, see my hands and my feet and all of that. He didn't show up and say, what cross? He didn't show up and say, I never was nailed to that thing. He didn't show up and say, which has become a myth that's been perpetuated, that's kept more people in bondage than I can even imagine, that you need to just, quote, forgive and forget. That's not biblically sound. And when we hear that, we think, I need to forgive and forget. And then we're told, unless you can forget it, you haven't really forgiven. And then we feel like we've never forgiven because we can't forget. How many of you know God doesn't want to give us some kind of convenient amnesia or loss of memory? In fact, well, some of you are going to push back and say, well, Keith, doesn't the Bible say that God will forgive us our sins and remember them no more? Yes, but the remember no more doesn't mean that he has no record of it or knowledge of it or memory of it. What it means is he'll no longer use it against us. So to forgive doesn't mean you have to forget and never be able to recall that. In other words, forgiveness doesn't mean it never happened. Of course it happened. We're not in denial. The nails were there. Therefore, there are scars. In fact, the scars are evidence that there were nails. And that's why he said to Thomas, Thomas said this, he said, Jesus, show me. See, Thomas gets a bad rap, doesn't he? Everybody calls him Doubting Thomas. And by the way, how many of you know the religious crowd always marks us because of one thing we do or say? And casts judgment on us. He didn't doubt to the point of unbelief. He questioned to the point of needing faith and evidence. And he came, and when the second time Jesus came back into the room with the disciples, which was 7 or 8 days later, if we read all the text, Thomas was there this time because he wasn't there the last time. We call him Doubting Thomas because he's not there. But there's another translation that says, in parentheses behind it, he's actually known as Didymus. How many know for good alliteration we call Doubting Diddy rather than Doubting Tommy? And if we're going to cast all these people into a category, I heard this from a friend of mine. I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. He says, what about the guys that were hiding there because they were afraid? He said, what about Scaredy Cat Simon? What about Locked Up Levi? They're all in this camp together. And so we understand then that he wasn't saying it didn't happen. So Simon actually said, Jesus, just show me where the nails were. He didn't say, show me where the nails are. He wasn't saying, I don't think this ever happened. Forgive doesn't mean to forget. Forgiveness doesn't mean it didn't happen. And second thing is this, forgiveness doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Forgiveness doesn't mean that it didn't hurt. How many of you know it happened? And can I say it in here? It hurt like hell. I mean, it was devastating. It set you back in life, in relationships, in your career, in business, in finance, in marriage, in family. It set you back because it hurt like crazy. Because some of you have encountered hurt that most of us will never understand because we haven't walked in your shoes, but you've been hurt so deeply. Some of you said, Keith, I was abused so bad, I would never wish that on anybody. I've sat most often with ladies who have said things like, when a guy wants to touch me, my skin crawls. And I don't know what to do with that because I'm married now. Scars. What Jesus wants to take away, are you ready for this, is the nail and the wound, and that we then live out of brokenness, not woundedness. There's a difference. There will be scars. We're not saying it didn't happen, and we're not saying it didn't hurt. Forgiveness is not a feeling, friends. It's a choice. And so the nails are gone, but the memory lives on. So therefore, it takes faith to forgive. It takes faith to believe, are you ready for this? That the same place where the nails were is the same source from which the healing comes. In fact, can I just say it this way? Our scars give others hope when they show them to us. You're going to hear a story that's going to give you hope. Let's watch it together.
My name is Marissa Stammer, and I have been a part of 3D Church since it started. I am the middle child of 3 girls. We're all very close in age, and I grew up in a small town, and I grew up as a pastor's kid there. I would say, as far as my faith in Jesus, that all began at a very early age, and I just always wanted to make sure that I was going to be in heaven, so I would pray and ask Jesus into my heart every night for a while, so make sure my salvation was secure. From the time I was in middle school, I was helping lead worship for elementary school. By the time I was in high school, I was leading the worship team for the junior high ministry. Worship was one of the primary ways that I really connected with Jesus and just getting to know Jesus on a more personal level. I moved out here to Colorado when I was 18 to go to Colorado Christian University. I did meet my now husband after much pursuing. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not kidding. That's true. We started dating my freshman year all the way into the fall of my junior year. We were talking future, we were talking marriage, and so when that all came to a crashing end, I was just devastated. So we broke up in September. I was a mess. I didn't really understand how this could happen because I really felt like this was my forever person and that God had, pretty much spoke that to me. And about 3 weeks later, my mom's dad, my grandpa, passed away. Just very, very broken and vulnerable and sad. It was just a lot of loss. Had never had my heart broken before, had never lost a family member before. So I was experiencing it in waves. And the night before the funeral, I went to catch up with an old friend, someone that I had done ministry with, that I was on worship team with, that we really connected through music and that sort of thing. So I figured it would just be another night of that. And he was a good friend of mine all through high school, and he really took advantage of my vulnerability and just how sad I was and broken I was. And that night I was raped by one of my best friends. I was numb. I was a zombie for the next several months of my life, especially the next day. I remember being at the funeral and just feeling like nothing. I couldn't grieve. I couldn't cry. I just remember, I didn't even know what to think, what to feel. I was just very confused because all I knew is that something happened that I did not want, but I was not ready to deal with it because I couldn't quite make sense of how somebody that I trusted and that I cared for could do something so horrific. I remember going back to school, and things were just falling apart, and I just really tried to avoid God, if that makes sense. I didn't engage in anything music or worship related for a while because of the way it would trigger me. I was so full of fear, and I just remember one night, probably 3 or 4 months later, just so overcome with what felt like at the time inexplicable fear. And I just didn't want to leave my apartment. I didn't want to get out of my bed. I was just freaking out. And I remember probably the closest thing I've ever had to an audible voice, but Jesus just gently saying, hey, you need to deal with this. And I remember verbally saying, I can't, I'm not ready, can't do this. But shortly after that, I knew I needed help. And then at that point, I finally built up enough courage and what was going on in my life to share with my parents. And they then paid for me to go see a specialist in women's trauma. I remember her kind of giving me options to take my voice back. You can write a letter to his school. You can do this, you can do that. But what you can't do is live there. And that was so huge for me. But really, it was giving me the tools to learn how to forgive and move on and heal. And I think I wrote a letter to him that I later burned as just my way of giving it to God and saying, I forgive you and I'm going to learn to move on. Had I not been able to first identify what he did and then knowingly choose to forgive, whether he was sorry or not, whether he ever apologized, whether he ever admitted it or not, that was irrelevant to the health of my soul and being able to live a life free to move on. God promised me that he would restore me and he would make me new. And I didn't know what that would look like. But the beautiful thing is that continues to this day. And he continues to fulfill that promise in ways I didn't really understand could be possible at the time. It was really through that more intensive counseling that Brian came back into my life. Just God really worked on us both separately and brought us back together in just a healthier way. There was just this whole second chance forgiveness theme running through my life at that point. And not only did we give each other a second chance, God gave us a second chance at a relationship that has just been incredibly healing in my life, which I never thought would be possible. This year we'll celebrate our 11th year of marriage, and we have 4 girls. Jesus is there waiting to forgive us and move forward. And the way that he so graciously nudged me and pursued me and didn't stop until I was, not that I've arrived, but that I continue to move forward towards healing and wholeness. That level of grace and forgiveness just kind of blew my mind. And if God can forgive me just like that, who am I to not forgive somebody else?
What do you say? For those of you that know and are part of the family, you know this. For those of you who are new, you may not. Marissa is our middle daughter. Forgiveness doesn't just have to come from the one who is directly wounded. It has to come from everyone that's connected to him. I'm not that kind of guy, but that day, I was ready to rip a head off. And I had to work through that. So how do you do it? Where do you even start? Well, to get the courage to forgive somebody else, the first thing you have to do is live on the receiving end of courage and receive God's love and forgiveness yourself. Really is. There's no way to get to the other side of that until you've received it yourself. In fact, I would say it this way. It's in receiving God's love that we are able to, in turn, love others. It's in receiving God's forgiveness that we're able then to be empowered to forgive others. And that's where the capacity for forgiveness comes from, and that's what sets Christianity apart. It's the only faith system on the planet that offers this mystical, magical, absolutely powerful, compelling thing called grace, which is absolute, complete pardon for any wrongdoing, for all sin, for all time. And that's what the cross is all about, friends. That's what Jesus did. Jesus, the innocent one, took our sin on himself, and he was nailed to the cross. We nailed him to the cross. And he was nailed to the cross so that we could be forgiven and free. And so it says in Colossians 2:13 and 14, he has forgiven some of our sin. Is that what it says? How many are glad it doesn't say some? He has forgiven all of our sins and canceled every record of the debt that we had to pay. How? By nailing it to the cross. So here's the facts, friends, as we move into our response time. I don't know what you've done. And I don't need to know, because you being free and forgiven is not based on what you have done. It's based on what Jesus has done for you. It's not about you making it up to God. It's about Jesus paid the price in full, canceling the debt entirely for the record that was against us. And so the focus is not on what we can do for us, but what Jesus did for us. And so once we really grasp, as Marissa said, the enormity of God's love and grace and the full expanse of His forgiveness, we then are positioned to freely forgive others. See, as she said, forgiveness is a choice. And she said, a deliberate choosing to forgive independent of the other person's behavior, whether they even ever acknowledge that they did wrong. And so once we do that, then we're in a position. So if you're taking notes here, I would just say forgiveness is a choice, but it's made possible on the basis of what Jesus did for us. So I can't demand a grace over my own life that I'm not willing to in turn offer for somebody else's wrongdoing to me. That's hypocritical, friends. And so, can I just say, all of my nails are in His cross, so are all of yours. And it's this understanding that positions me to be able to forgive those who have wronged me and wronged people around me that I deeply care about. And so that's just first thing. And then second thing, to wrap it up, is we not only receive, but we receive so that we can in turn release others and freely offer to others what God has freely given to us. In fact, that's what Matthew 10 says. Freely you have received, freely give. And so the significance of what Jesus has done for us leaves us with no other option. So don't resist this point of truth and application day. It really is the key to freedom. Can I just say this? Choices lead, feelings follow. If you wait for the feeling to forgive, you'll never feel like it. The devil and other people will make sure of that. And so you don't wait for the feeling. You make a choice, and when you make the choice, your feelings will follow your choices and your actions. And that's the way that works. And so to forgive, as somebody said, is to set a prisoner free and to discover that the prisoner was me. I like to illustrate it this way, because sometimes when we forgive, I need to say that it's not that it didn't happen, it's not that it didn't hurt, and it's not that they get off the hook. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes we feel like, but if I forgive them for what they did to me, then they're getting away with it. No. How many know the Bible says that God will settle the score someday? And Jesus said about Himself in 1 Peter 2, when Jesus suffered, He did not threaten to get even. He left His case in the hands of God. What I'm saying is this. It's not that I'm letting them off the hook. What I am doing when I forgive is transferring them over to God's hook. So for every offense that's ever come into my life, every hurt that I've ever incurred, I willfully choose to forgive that person for that offense. And when in doing so, by a choice, not feelings, I am transferring them over and putting them in God's hands. But how many of you know they can't be in my hands and in God's hands at the same time? God is not free to do what He needs to do in that person's life about that issue until you take it out of your hands and you put it in His hands, and you do that by choosing to forgive. And once you do, how many of you know, now that they're in His hands, He can do whatever needs to be done to settle the score. And so how do we forgive? I mean, really. And I know, I want to say a couple of things before we now respond. I realize that the story we shared today could trigger some things for people sitting in this room. It did for a significant number of people in the first service. So two things. One, today, if it's never been addressed, is the beginning of your healing as you move in the direction to receive and offer forgiveness. Second, you may need to talk to somebody professional like Marissa did, and if so, let us know. We will put you in contact with people that are incredibly credible, that we have high confidence in. So I just wanted to say that, park that. That said, what's on our shoulders today is to come to God and say, God, I have messed up. I need your forgiveness for. And God, I've been hurt deeply by other people. I choose to forgive them for. every one of you on your chairs, you will find some invite cards to our new series that begins next week. So this is my, unapologetic invitation to come back next week and join us as we explore the spirit of spirituality. The other two things that were on your chair, a blank piece of paper other than some words at the top on both sides. Let's take a moment and everybody go ahead and grab that. On the one side it says, I receive God's forgiveness for. The invitation as we move into our response time right now is to take a moment of reflection and say, God, I don't know if I've ever just brought closure to this. I don't know if I've ever received your forgiveness for. And by writing that down today, and by the way, this is just between you and God. This isn't being shared. When you give an opportunity here in a minute to come and nail it to the cross, you can fold it over so that there's nobody looking at it. And then the other side, it says, I forgive, name. If you want, you can just use initials for. Here's what I know. The more specific we are in our confession, the greater the freedom on the other side. And so the invitation is just to be as specific as you choose to, but in receiving forgiveness and then offering forgiveness. Because some of you, you'll never find freedom till you receive and offer forgiveness. And so the invitation day is to come and take this piece of paper, use one of those thumbtacks, put it on the cross, and then you'll see there hanging with a number of nails some keys. And to take one of those keys, because today's message was entitled Easter, the Key to Freedom. And by taking that key, we invite you to put that on a keychain somewhere in front of you as a continual reminder that on Easter 2019, you received the key to freedom and you're living in that freedom every day. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your presence here. God, would you just pray with me? Just say, God, thank you for bringing me here today. I'm so grateful for your amazing grace and your outrageous love. And Lord, I admit that I've messed up. And in my mistakes and sin, I've hurt others. And so I acknowledge right now that I need your forgiveness. But I receive it now by faith. Complete pardon. And the best I know how, I surrender my life to you. And I ask you to fill me with your Spirit and fill me with your love for others. And Lord, because you have forgiven me, I now choose to forgive those who have hurt me. And I just give all of this to you in Jesus' name.